Hi, everybody. Welcome into this interview here. For those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Drew Duff. I'm a freelance videographer here in the Phoenix, Arizona area. And today I'm interviewing someone who I've known for a very long time, my good buddy, my good friend, Mr. Nate Timmons. He is the creator of the Dad Book. Him and I went to high school together. We go way back. Nate, thanks for joining me. How's everything going?
Drew, no, thanks for having me. Things are going well. It's refreshing to be off of the bike and off of the traveling aspect of the Dad Book, and to be back in Kalamazoo, at least for the time being. And it's nice to have a little break. So,
yeah, no, I imagine. So I feel like most of our audience probably has been following you the whole trip. But just to give us like a brief background, how did the Dad Book start? I know we've talked about it before. You've said you've had this idea for a long time. So when did you first get the idea, and kind of how did it like materialize from there?
yeah, absolutely. So really the premise of the Dad Book is to interview one dad from each state, from all 50 United States, and then compile those interviews into what I'm calling the Dad Book: 50 Dads, 50 States. In an effort to kind of shepherd in the next generation of influential fathers. And really the kind of origination for this idea, the genesis for this idea, would have been all the way back in probably my sophomore or junior year of college. So it's been probably 5 years in the making, truly, of this idea that I had in the back of my mind. Kind of growing up, always looking up to my dad, wanting to kind of emulate him in my own life, and then coming into college and realizing, people come from single parent households, grandparents raised them, same-sex couple, couple raised a child, an adopted child, and understanding that people come from all different walks of life, from all different parent and household structures, and realizing, just because my mom and dad have been married for 25 plus years, that doesn't mean that's the norm for everybody, but that also doesn't mean that somebody can come from a different family structure, a different household, and turn out just fine, turn out successful, turn out to be a contributing person in society, right? And to encapsulate this idea, I thought it'd be really interesting to interview one dad from each state, from rich dad, poor dad, same-sex couple, people from all walks of life, and to put it all into this book to showcase what fatherhood in America looks like. So.
Yeah, no, that's really cool that you had this idea, multiple years ago, and it just kind of, started to kind of take on a life of its own and kind of materialized in that sense. And I get where you're coming from, because you and I think, have very similar family backgrounds, and where like my parents have been married for like almost 30 years, and like a very nuclear family, I guess you could call that. But yeah, and you're right, like that's not. I get it's weird to say that that's normal, because like so many people come from so many different backgrounds, and there's so many different situations. So I guess what I'm leading to is like, what are some really important things that you took away from your trip, and how would you say that you think about like families and stuff like that now that you've at least gone to like at least 49 states?
49, yeah.
One's still incoming, I know that for sure. But now that you've been to 49 of the 50 states, like what would you say is like the biggest thing you've kind of learned about that family structure that you talked about?
Yeah. So definitely for the family structure, one of the commonalities from all the dads that I've interviewed is just this idea of being intentional as a father, right? I myself am not a father, so I am not one to speak from personal experience, but from what I've learned from these dads, there's this intentionality piece, right? Where raising a family, growing up, it's where we live in a society today where we can so easily just grab our phone and scroll through Facebook, scroll through Instagram, pop up Netflix. And for somebody raising a child, or for a dad in a family setting, it is so easy to get away from the family and to say, I'm going to relax today, I'm going to flip on Netflix. But those are moments that you otherwise don't have to raise your child, to raise your family. And there's this piece of intentionality, whereas as a father, it's kind of your responsibility, your duty to be present in your child's life, to raise them, to play with them. I know when I was in Knoxville, Tennessee, the dad that I was staying with his family, and this thunderstorm came barreling in. It was thundering, lightning, and it was me, him, his wife, and his son. And his wife and I were like, oh, we're gonna hang inside. We're gonna turn on Netflix. We're gonna watch a movie or whatever, just kind of hang out and let the storm pass. And meanwhile, him and his son, they were like, no, we're gonna go outside. They both flip off their shirts. They run outside. They're running in the rain, running in the thunderstorm and the lightning. But two guys just having a great time outside during this all. And that was definitely something that kind of stood out to me, where here's an opportunity where he could have easily said, okay, we're all going to, hang out inside. We're going to kind of turn on the TV and we'll all just kind of relax and let the storm pass over. Instead, he took it upon himself to say, hey, Huck, his son, hey, Huck, let's go outside. Let's go play. And they come back inside, sopping wet, rain all over them, but they're grinning from ear to ear with just this, infectious smile that's, got everybody excited. And it's like, oh, like, good for you guys. Meanwhile, him and his wife and I were sitting inside and we're like, man, I would hate to be those guys. They're all sopping wet, but they're, having the time of their life, right? And I think that's really the biggest takeaway I've had so far from these 49 states, from interviewing these dads from across the country, is just this idea of being an intentional father and how crucial that is to being an influential father. So
it's so funny how at the time of recording, this is the end of August of 2020, so we're still in the coronavirus pandemic. But I think one of the interesting things that maybe we've all learned from this, but definitely I have, is like those little moments in life, right? Yeah. Just like it's not anything giant. It's not anything like you're like consciously thinking about. It's just, oh, it's raining. Most, like you said, most people, let's stay inside. It's raining. I don't want to get wet. Without a thought though, just run outside in the rain when it's pouring. And it's just like those little moments, man. Like I'm sure you've got a bunch of them that you remember from your childhood, and I do too. It's just like those little moments really stick with you, especially when you're a kid and you just kind of spontaneously act like that. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, things like my own life, growing up in a science class, right, having to do a science project and having to build a catapult to launch a ping pong ball. And I was like, hey, Dad, do you think you could help me build this? And he's like, absolutely. It was a Sunday afternoon. He could have easily, said, oh, no, the Lions are playing, and God forbid anybody wants to watch the Lions play. But, he dropped everything, and we went outside and we started building this catapult together. And those are memories that I'll never forget. And I'm sure you have just as many as anybody listening to this. We all have those memories with our parents, our fathers, our moms, where they took the time out of their day to raise us and to be a part of our lives, right? And those are the moments that I think, like you said, with Corona especially, we take so much of our life for granted. And I think it's those small things that really make the bigger picture. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long I know you just finished biking in the Northeast. About how long have you been done now?
So I got back to Kalamazoo. It would have been like August 8th, August 10th-ish. So about 2.5, 3 weeks back home now. And actually just yesterday was the first time I've gotten back on my bike and went for like a real bike ride. And I have not been able to walk all day.
So that kind of leads me to like, so you, over the last like year plus, like you've been kind of doing this thing, and like it's always like, what's next state, I'm always on the road doing like, it's just very focused. And now it seems like, I mean, you're not done. I mean, you still have one more to go, but it's like you're pretty much almost through your journey. So like, what does that feel like? I'm sure it's like you've been building at this thing for years now. And, like I said, over the year, you've been driving around the country, but like, what does it feel like now? How does it kind of feel like when you cross that finish line and in the Northeast? Like, what did that feel like?
Yeah. So as you mentioned, I started this trip in an old Volkswagen van, made it to 36 states in the van. And then the van's engine blew up, as an old Volkswagen would only do. And I ended up pedal biking on a bike from Little Rock, Arkansas to Portland, Maine. And when I made it to Maine, when I made it to Portland after 40 days on the bike, 1,776 miles, nobody's counting but me. But when I crossed that finish line, I had my girlfriend, my buddy Charlie Eaton and his girlfriend there. They drove to kind of rescue me, and they made this kind of, finish line out of like a true finish line, checkered line. And seeing them, I was coming around this bike path. I was coming around the corner, and I see them all of 100 yards away from me, and just this euphoric feeling of like, oh my gosh, I just biked across the country. Like, I am not a cyclist through and through, minimal training ahead of time. And just that feeling of like, holy shit, like this is done. I apologize for the explicit, but like truly, I mean, like compared to nothing that I've done in my life before. Just this feeling of accomplishment, this feeling of like, I did it, like this is it. It made everything else that I've done in my life seem so insignificant, and crossing that finish line was like, all right, this is what I'm most proud of having done. That being said, there is still Hawaii to go, and I think that is truly going to be the moment where I maybe have a breakdown moment and like start crying or start, truly get like having an appreciation for just how big of a project this was, traveling to all 50 states. And I think it's kind of off-put to when I cross Hawaii. I think that's ultimately when I'm going to feel that like big relief, because right now there is still that burden of crossing state number 50. So yeah, it was euphoric in the moment, but I'm still super excited, still super stoked to get to Hawaii, and I think that's going to be the one that I really feel the most emotions from.
Sure. Yeah, because like you said, it's 49 out of 50, and then
right.
Once you get 50 out of 50, like you're officially done. So yeah,
98% is great, but 100% is what I'm really shooting for here. So
right. Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up Hawaii. So I'm interested to know like what your plans are to get there, because travel is very limited right now. And then I know Hawaii has some quarantine rules happening right now. Again, this is the end of August 2020. So like, what are your plans to get to Hawaii, especially like with an ongoing pandemic, and what has that been like trying to schedule that?
Yeah, and it's funny you say August 2020, and to kind of like make that timestamp, because hopefully in 2 years we'll look back on this and say, oh yeah, remember August 2020 when you couldn't travel. So right now Hawaii does have this very strict no visitor policy, where if you fly to the island, it's a mandatory 14 days self-isolation, self-quarantine. And even if you come to the island with a negative COVID test, they won't allow you on the island. They'll allow you on the island, but you have to self-quarantine for 14 days, even if you have a negative COVID result. September 1st, they're supposed to reevaluate that. August 1st, they were looking at it, and they were going to potentially change it so that if you showed up to the island with a negative COVID test within the last 72 hours, that they would allow you on the island just as you normally would. You'd be free to go. So they're supposed to reevaluate that September 1st. So I'm kind of waiting. That's Tuesday of this week. Waiting to kind of see what that looks like. And otherwise, realistically, the last 3 weeks, it's just been saving up money again, kind of getting ready for that plane ticket, for the hotel or couch surfing that I end up doing on Hawaii. Saving up money in the meantime, and kind of planning the trip as a whole, planning all the islands I want to go to while I'm there, planning the interview while I'm there, planning accommodations for while I'm there. So it's planning without an actual time, right? So it's reaching out to people and saying, hey, I'm planning to be there, I just don't know exactly when.
Right. Yeah, and that's another thing I was going to ask too, is like, Hawaii is, I've never been, I'd love to go, but it's like, there's a bunch of different islands. You have like Oahu and Kauai, and like, so where do you have your interview scheduled, and like how many of the islands do you realistically think you can go to? Like I said, I think once you're in Hawaii and once you're past the restrictions, I think it'd be okay and you're allowed to travel. But what islands are you planning on going to, and kind of what are you planning on doing when you get there?
And it's funny you say that, because I've actually been wondering that myself. Is all the information I've seen online is that once you get to Hawaii, and that's including all of the islands, right? There's 5 or 6 islands. Don't hold me to that number, but there's a handful of different islands. So I'll fly into the Big Island, which is where like Honolulu is. So I'll fly into the Big Island, and then it's my understanding that if they were to change it so that if you showed up with a negative test, you'd be free to visit all of Hawaii. I don't know if the smaller islands are being as strict as the Big Island is. But the interview's on the Big Island. So the Big Island is definitely going to be the one I go to. And then if I can include maybe one or two more islands, I'd definitely be interested in that. But the Big Island is really the one I'm most focused on. And if I can go to a couple more islands, great. If not, Big Island is good enough. Hawaii is good enough.
Yeah. And something else that kind of just came into my mind is, like, if it were me and you have this chance to travel across the country, I would view it as like a vacation, kind of. I would have a really hard time getting that out of my head because, you and I both grew up in Michigan and kind of been in the Midwest most of our lives so far. And it's, so like getting to see different parts of the country, and like you visited me last November when I lived in Phoenix.
Yeah.
So how much of this trip, like, did you have that idea in your head, or when you were driving around or when you were biking around, you're like, no, I have an interview to do, I have like this to get to, I have a time frame? Or in your mind were you like, I can, it's a kind of a vacation, I'm traveling across the country, like, this is a cool thing, I don't know when I'm going to get to do it again? So like, what was your mindset with that?
Yeah. So as I was traveling, it truly was where, each state I would try and spend 2 to 3, maybe 4 days in the state. Some of the bigger states, California, Florida. I'm trying to think of the states that I maybe spent some more time in. Colorado, Phoenix. I spent maybe 4 to 5, sometimes a week in that state. And realistically, it was truly once I got to the state and once I did the interview, that work function of it where I, knew I had to do the interview, knew I had to do this for the dad book. Once that interview was over, then I kind of took a sigh of relief, and that kind of was like, okay, I can actually enjoy the rest of the state. But I did the first portion of it in a 35-year-old van that was notorious for breaking down and that got terrible gas mileage. And then the other portion I did on a bike. So as much as I wished and kind of thought that each state was a vacation, it was often met with just enough stress and quite frankly, more stress than it would be otherwise. So that any relaxation or any idea of vacation I may have had was just negated with all the stress of like, all right, is my van going to break down at this exit? Or, do I want to try driving an hour out of the way to go visit this national park? But if my van dies at that national park, then I'm an hour out of the way from the nearest, mechanic, tow company. So yeah, it was for every moment that it maybe felt like a vacation, it was just truly negated by like, all right, I have to figure out accommodations for the night. I have to figure out if this Planet Fitness lets people park their van overnight. I need to call this fire station ahead of time to see if I can camp out for the night in my tent on the bike. So yeah, there were definitely moments along the way that felt like vacations when I was in Florida, South Carolina, when I could go to the beach and kind of hang out, relax. But more often than not, I found myself constantly just having to plan for the next day, plan for the next week. And yeah, so yes and no.
Yeah, I feel like definitely if it were me, that would be a really hard thing to balance, because that's an interesting thing that you mentioned that I wouldn't have thought about, is like, yeah, you drove an old van, and and like, it's very interesting. Like, I could go out of the way to this cool national park, like, or if I break down, like, I could be really screwed out here, and then that might be the end of my trip.
Well, and I'm even thinking when I was in Phoenix with you, Spencer, your roommate, and I, we were out in the kayaks, and there was black smoke off in the distance. And I was like, oh, Spencer, is that like a wildfire? And he's like, no, that's a car that's on fire. That's a daily occurrence here in Phoenix. Like, cars overheat and then their engine, catches on fire. And I'm sitting there going, dude, if like, I have a 35-year-old van, you can't be telling me that. So then I'm immediately kind of like thinking, well, shoot, should I stay on the main highway, or was I going to do the route that does veer off a little bit so that I could visit Sedonia? And I was like, no, I should probably stay on the most efficient route in the event my van's engine caught on fire. So yeah, I mean, truly, the van and the bike were always in the back of my mind, and that's where my mind always went to with anything. It was like, oh, cars catch on fire down here. Oh, I have a 35-year-old van. What are the chances that catches on fire?
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's crazy. And, kind of just you talking about all the different states you've been to, like, do you have a favorite state that you visited? Or I guess that's a tough criteria for you to answer, maybe, because a favorite state could mean like the state that you had your best interview in, or the best time, or like the interview you felt like you got the most out of, or the state like, I know you saw some friends who we went to high school with in Colorado, and you saw me in Arizona, and like you saw different people who you knew across the country. So I guess like putting all of that together, did you have a favorite state or place that you went to, and why?
So this is a question I often get. So no worries on the like. This may be a tough question. I've kind of thought through it myself. And Montana truly was the one state. And the reason I think Montana kind of rises to the top for me is it was a state that going into it, I was like, I'm going to do the interview and I'm going to get out. There is nothing to see in Montana. It's just this big state in the middle of the map that I guarantee probably 60% of us could not like point on the map and say that's Montana. I know I myself before this was like, Montana is where exactly? North Dakota, Minnesota, where? But truly when I got there, it's just this absolutely immaculate state that's so off the grid. Like when you are driving from Billings, Montana to Bozeman, Montana, those are the two, major cities in the state. There is nothing but the expanse of mountains to your south, like the Rockies to your south. And then to your north, you've got the mountains with Glacier National Park, and it's just this beautiful expanse of nothingness, and it's unlike anything I've ever seen. It's truly beautiful, and realistically, that is kind of the next goal within the next 5 to 10 years is to just buy a little piece of property out in Montana that I can like maybe set Vanna for the rest of her life, and just have like a little place that I could go to off the grid, camp out, go hunt, go hike. But yeah, Montana is just so beautiful from everything else I've seen. And that would definitely be my favorite state. State I think that I was most looking forward to and what I thought would be my favorite state that turned out to be the exact opposite would have been California. Okay. It was way too long. I drove basically down the coast doing PCH and Highway 101, but it was a state that was so long, and I was truly doing it about a year ago today, right around this time frame at least, and wildfires, insane gas prices. I think I was paying $4.57 a gallon. In a van that at the time was getting 8 miles to the gallon because the fuel line was clogged up. And the van ended up breaking down 3 times in California. I was there, drove through a wildfire. I was stranded in this small town because the van wouldn't start up. I could keep going on and on about California, but I was looking forward to it so much, and then it just let down.
So I'm interested to know, I know we've mentioned it a couple times already, but living through a pandemic at the moment, and it kind of started, we're only about 6 months into it, but, you did a decent amount of your trip before it started. So how did it affect your travel? I guess where were you at kind of in the beginning of March when everything started to lock down, and what did you think about like the future of your trip and kind of how travel would work after that?
Yeah, so Corona has definitely been, people talk about like, oh, there's this story in the dad book, you traveled all these states, but COVID has truly been such an integral part of this entire project, right? Where when the van died, when the van's engine blew up, it would have been end of January, early February of this year. So we're talking, 3 weeks basically before the entire country and the entire world really closed down. So when the van's engine blew up, I was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and my parents drove down. We rented a U-Haul trailer, got it back, drove the van back to Kalamazoo, Michigan, where it's still currently at. And for the next, 5 months while I was saving up money to get back on the road to figure out how to finish the last states, that's when COVID happened, where I was back home, kind of knew that COVID was happening. It was over in China at the time. We had heard, it's starting to get pretty serious. And then I would have been in Kalamazoo when everything kind of hit the fan, when airline travel stopped, when states started shutting down and not allowing visitors. I was back in Michigan. So truly, the van kind of saved me from what would have been an absolute disaster had I been living in the van on the road. So, I mean, truly, I like to think Volkswagens have a way of knowing more than anything else. I think Vanna knew that something bad was coming and said, you know what, Nate, it's time for me to call it quits because I think you should call it quits. I think I had $160 to my name when I was in Little Rock, and I was looking at the Northeast as the last, 14 states. And I said, best case scenario, I'll drive to Virginia. I'll pull off. I'll find a, job at a Planet Fitness. I'll work at a Planet Fitness for a month or two, save up some money to finish the final states. But none of that would have been able to happen, right? If I had kept driving, I would have gotten to Virginia. COVID would have happened. All of the Planet Fitnesses shut down. I wouldn't have had any access to showers. I wouldn't have had any access to part-time jobs. I mean, nobody was hiring. Everybody was shutting down. And then for the interviews, there would have been no dad that would have been like, yeah, this guy's traveling the country. Feel free to sit down at my house and have a conversation with me.
I can't even imagine. That's got to seem weird after COVID started.
So truly the van dying and the van giving up was the best case scenario. Looking back, at the time I would have never guessed that, but looking back, the van dying and allowing me to get back to Michigan was an opportunity for me to kind of reevaluate. All right, how do I handle traveling during COVID? How do I save up money? And I was able to find a job back in Kalamazoo that was still hiring. It was a manufacturing job, and they were still hiring through it. So I worked in a manufacturing job for the 5 months kind of leading up to when I hopped on the bike. And then, so traveling on bike through COVID, through all of the states, it was definitely interesting. There were definitely some moments that really sucked because of COVID, for a lack of better words. I mean, truly going, and it's things that you wouldn't think of, right? So riding my bike in the middle of the day and being like, looking at my water bottle and saying, oh, my water's getting low. I'll stop into this gas station and fill up water. Going to the gas station and their fountain machine is out. It's they're not allowing people to fill up their water bottles. Having to go to the bathroom and going to a gas station or a restaurant and saying, hey, do you mind if I use your bathroom? Oh, sorry, our bathrooms are closed to the public right now. It was all the little minute details that really made it a little bit more challenging to figure out. And then even as I got kind of along the Northeast, I rode my bike through New York City, which is, this hot spot for this global pandemic, and kind of dealing with that and stopping at hotels and them having me sign a form that says, have you traveled through all of these states recently? If so, are you going to quarantine for the next 10 days or are you going to get a negative COVID test in the next 3? So definitely some things along the way that had to overcome that otherwise would not have been in the original plan had COVID not happened. But yeah, I truly am thankful, and again, I can't thank my van enough for dying because it allowed me the time and kind of the opportunity to think it through and to get things right ahead of time. So
I appreciate it, Nate. That was cool. I think it's cool, kind of like where you and I started this journey because. I graduated with a video production degree from Ball State, and I was in Kalamazoo after I graduated, and I'm like, oh, Nate, I know him, and he's doing this really cool project, and I kind of wanted to get involved in it, and so we shot that video right when you got the van, and you're walking people through the van, and that was 2+ years ago now, which is crazy. How we've been kind of doing this little partnership since then, but I appreciate the time, man. It's awesome. Thank you so much. I just wanted to do this because I feel like I want more people to know about this. Definitely people who aren't familiar with you, who follow me, and some crossover as well, and kind of give people an idea of what you're doing next and what you've been doing since you've been done. So if somebody wants to kind of, so say someone who's watching this or listening to this is brand new to the Dad Book and they don't know much about it, where would you recommend that they go to kind of get an idea, get some background on what it is?
Yes. So if you're completely new to this project, this idea, therealdadbook.com, that's the real, REAL, dadbook.com. That's my website. That's where I've got everything about the project, kind of walking people through why I started it, kind of the journey as a whole, videos from the journey. That's where you can kind of find everything kind of all combined into one place. And then also on social media, Facebook and Instagram at The Real Dad Book. You can see all the pictures from the van, from the bike, stories from the road. You know, there's me getting broken into in an Airbnb in New Orleans. There's me, you know, getting a hitchhiker in Virginia and being, you know, picked up by a guy that had seen me on the news and traveling to a new location. That's all on social media. That's again, Facebook and Instagram, the Dad Book, The Real Dad Book. You'll be able to find it there, and you can kind of see the actual progress of the journey on there. So, yeah.
Cool, man. It's been awesome. Really appreciate it, and I really look forward to what's coming next, man. Thanks for the time.
No, yeah, thank you, man.
All right. Take it easy.